Our first appeal takes us to Aberdeen in a case that's become one of their most notorious unsolved crimes. Up on the coast of northeast Scotland, the 1980s was a time of unprecedented change.
Aberdeen was in a state of transformation. At that time, the four major industries were fishing, shipbuilding, industrial textiles, and paper. And a lot of them were in decline, and of course then the oil hit Aberdeen, and that basically changed everything. We saw a large influx of people from around the world, a lot of transient people into Aberdeen.
Alec Mackay lived here through these changes, but the memories that have stayed with him are of his uncle George and one of the city's darkest episodes.
George was born and bred at Aberdeen. He grew up in Aberdeen. He was just an ordinary working man. And we called him, well, part of the family called him George. Our part called him Dodd, which is an abbreviation for George. My Uncle Dodd was just a genuinely nice guy. He liked kids, and growing up, we had a great time with him. He loved these hobbies, whether it was keeping his pigeons. He had a small boat that he liked to go out, and I think he was a big kid at heart as well, in many ways.
He'd been happily married for 37 years.
My Aunt Jessie was one of life's gems. Her and Dodd met and married. They had a great marriage. Their relationship was really strong, really strong.
In the late 1970s, George was made redundant from his job at a factory. To make ends meet, he took up work as a taxi driver.
That was really just to earn an income from it for him and my Aunt Jessie, and he didn't particularly like it. I know my Aunt Jessie really hated him doing that job. She always said to him, she says, "I'm worried about your dad doing that, particularly on the night shift." He says, "Oh, Jess," he said, "if anybody tries to take my money, etc., he says, I'm going to give it to them." He says, my Uncle Dodd was not a fighter. He just was not a fighter.
On Thursday, the 29th of September, 1983, George was working an evening shift. At around 8:30 p.m, his Ford Cortina taxi was seen parked as he picked up a fare on the busy Queen's Road. He radioed through to the taxi control room to say he was heading to Cooter on the western outskirts of Aberdeen. But George would never reach his destination. As George drove his taxi towards Cooter, he turned onto Pitfoddle's Station Road and stopped. It's there George was brutally attacked by his passenger. The attacker used a cheese wire as a garrote. They spilled out onto the road, where two boys passing on their bikes witnessed George being strangled. He was desperately calling for help. The two boys raced to call the police, but it was too late.
Dodd was late, and Jessie had been anxious in terms of when she got to see her husband again. And then there's a knock at the door. Police were there with on it. It's funny, I never get emotional, but just something's set me off, sorry.
And then the phone in Alec's house rang.
"What did you say, Mother?" He says, "Dodd's dead." I says, "Oh." And then, of course, I asked her what had happened, and she says, "Well, it's a little bit fuzzy just now." She says, "But he's been murdered. He was out in his taxi, and someone's murdered him." And that was the night that we lost my uncle.
Police have been searching waste ground and gardens all round the quiet suburban street where Mr. Murdoch died. Dog handlers too have been called in to help in the search for a man between 20 and 30 years old whose dark clothing, say the police, may be blood-stained.
I would appeal to anyone who was in the Queen's Road area of the city between 8:15 and 8:45 last night and who saw anything that they think will help me.
Police have set up a base close to the spot Mr. Murdoch was attacked, on the ground outside his taxi. The man they're looking for is 5 foot 7 inches tall, thin, has short dark hair and is clean shaven.
The news shocked the nation. Dubbed the Cheesewire Killer, police mounted a huge manhunt to find George's murderer.
It was brutal, very brutal. Someone carrying a cheese wire with them? Yeah, wow, what kind of person would do that? They're not using it for their work. It's premeditated, it has to be. It takes a special, callous individual to go out with something like that.
A possible sighting of a man seen with blood on his hands at a local chip shop shortly after the murder didn't bring any new leads or a name. After a long investigation, and despite their efforts, there were no substantial leads and no further clues. All that is known is that George's wallet and his fares from that evening had been taken. Jesse's worst fears had been played out.
Unfortunately, of course, after the death of Dodd, her life changed just remarkably. Her health went into decline. She never ever spoke about Dodd's murder, but she never felt safe. She always thought that the killer was going to come back and harm her.
On the 24th of March 2004, Jessie passed away.
So unfortunately, she went to her grave, not knowing who his murderer was. At times, it makes me angry, sad. I mean, that she wasn't able to see justice.
After all this time, Alec and the rest of George's family haven't given up hope that someone may come forward with information.
For the family, and also for those that have passed, you can't take something like that to your grave. I mean, even if it's a hunch and it's a small piece of information, please share it. Small snippets of information from you might actually help us with a small piece of information from somebody else. We're able to start joining the dots. I mean, closure to a family is I mean, it's like gold dust. It's something that you crave for, that you need. We certainly do. Even after 38 years, and I know a lot of people might say cold case murder, who cares? And a family care. We've always cared, we always will.
I'm joined by DI James Callender from Police Scotland now, the investigating officer in the case. Thank you for joining us, James. It's clearly a long time ago, but it's obvious this is still deeply felt by the family.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's vital for the family and ourselves that, you know, we're finding cuts this killer. Poor Jessie died without knowing who killed her husband, and, you know, the family are determined to find out who that is and seek some closure for themselves.
Definitely. Well, can you just talk us through the key details of what happened that night? We're going to see the map now that we can show you. Just talk us through this, James.
Yeah, so the 29th of September 1983, George was working as a taxi driver and he picked up a fare in Queen's Road in the west end of Aberdeen. He travelled that couple of miles to Bitfordle Station Road and informed the control room he was doing a journey to Cooter, and that's where he was attacked with a cheese wire which was fashioned into a garrote.
Oh, it's just so barbaric. And there were two young witnesses that did see what happened, which must have been traumatic for them. There was also someone else, we mentioned it in the film there, that came into a takeaway who you'd still like to identify. Tell me about that person.
Yeah, so that night in a fish and chip shop named Mr. Chips on Great Western Road, a gentleman entered the fish and chip shop. He was wearing dark clothing, dark hair, in his early 20s. He had several scratches to his face, a bruised eye, and he was asking for plasters, and he had a cut hand. OK, now it's worth mentioning this person was described as being in their 20s at the time. Of course, there would be significantly older, perhaps mid to late 50s now. Now, this was such a brutal attack. Money was taken, but even that was a very small amount, wasn't it? Yeah, absolutely. George had a small amount of money on him. The killer took his wallet and the takings from the taxi, which amounted to anywhere between £21 and £35. Not a lot of money. You know, this shouldn't have happened. George shouldn't have lost his wife, and obviously the family have lost a beloved husband and an uncle. And we heard in the film there the family saying he was the sort of person that said, if anyone was trying to take my money, I'd just give it to them. He would just give it to them, absolutely. And as his nephew Alex said, he wasn't a fighter. OK. How can our viewers help today? It was a long time ago, but what can they do? Yeah, we're just hoping to reach out to those people we haven't reached out to before. Hopefully they can provide us with that little bit of information, that vital information that'll help us close this case. Yeah, it could be that one piece of information that makes all the difference. James, thank you. It's worth noting that the family, along with a local newspaper, have come together on this to provide a £20,000 reward for information leading to the confirmed identity of the killer, if anyone did need that extra incentive. So, do you have any information that could help police catch the person responsible?